up this list, in our number 10 spot we have the Amazon fire. The Amazon rainforest is incredibly important to our Earth as it represents over half of the planet's remaining rainforests. The Amazon comprises the largest and most biodiverse group of tropical rainforest in the world, with an estimated 390 billion individual trees divided up into 16,000 species. And that's just trees. That doesn't even scratch the surface of the plant life, the animal life, and the human life that call the rainforest home. That is why this photo that was taken in July of this year is extremely unsettling. In the summer of 2019, the Amazon was the focus of everyone's attention because large chunks of it had gone up in flames. 2020 ended up being an even worse year for the forest and fires, and unfortunately 2021 isn't any different. In 2020, it is said that fires blazed more than 19 million acres of the world's largest tropical rainforest, and 2021 might be even worse than that. That is a big problem for a multitude of reasons, one of them being that it is now realized that because of these fires, there are areas of the forest that are emitting more carbon than they are absorbing. That may not seem like a big deal, but the Amazon is one of the best defenses we have against climate change, so its health does affect us all, and it's something we should all care about very much. In our number 9 spot today we have Cyclone Kenneth. In 2019, the intense tropical cyclone Kenneth ripped through Mozambique, making it the strongest tropical cyclone to hit the country since modern records began. The cyclone not only affected Mozambique, but also caused significant damage to the Comoro Islands and Tanzania as well. Cyclone Kenneth took the lives of at least 52 people, and it was estimated that it cost about $100 million in damages. To make matters worse, Kenneth was striking Mozambique just a month after a hurricane had devastated the northern part of the country. This photo was taken from the air looking down on a village that lies just north of Pemba, Mozambique, and you can clearly see the amount of damage and devastation the storm caused. As someone who is exceptionally lucky to have never experienced anything like this, I can't even imagine how terrifying and difficult it would be to go through. In our number 8 spot today we have the lipstick killer. This is a photo that comes to us from December 10th, 1945. If looking at this image gives you a shudder down your spine, that absolutely makes sense as it was written by a terrible person known as the lipstick killer. This photo was an image of a note he left written on the wall at one of his crime scenes. The photo comes from the apartment of Frances Brown, as just before he wrote this message, he took her life. After this message was left, he ended up taking the life of one other person before he was finally caught by police 6 months later. The message scrawled in the photo reads, quote, "For heaven's sake, catch me before I kill more. I cannot control myself." It is an absolutely chilling note with a horrifying backstory. In our number 7 spot today we have the Peru flooding. In March of 2017, Peru suffered the worst flooding that had been seen in decades. Heavy bouts of rain that saw 10 times more rainfall than normal caused rivers to overflow, mudslides to destroy roads and farms, and mass amounts of flooding that took the lives of more than 70 people and displaced thousands. This photo was taken on March 17th, 2017, and it shows a group of people stranded in the floodwaters holding onto a rope trying to make their way through the water and to safety. This photo clearly shows the severity of the situation, and when this photo was taken, the end wasn't even near for the wet weather. This must have been an absolutely frightening time for those living in Peru, as well as for those who were tasked with the rescue efforts. In our number 6 spot today we have the Europe flood. This photo comes to us from the summer of this year as people across Western Europe experienced disastrous flooding. After days of heavy rain, it ended up turning rivers that were usually normal and calm into raging currents that ravaged the streets and left cars and power lines being swept away, homes engulfed, and residents trapped. This photo was taken in Erfstadt, which is just southwest of Cologne, and it shows how a bunch of these houses collapsed due to subsidence, which is the sudden sinking of the ground's surface. Unfortunately, these floods caused many people to lose their lives, mostly in Germany, but there were sadly dozens of people in Belgium as well, all of which is an absolute tragedy. Rescue workers worked tirelessly to help as many people as possible escape this terrible situation. In our number 5 spot today we have the Oroville Dam. On February 13th, 2017 in Oroville, California, the Oroville Dam, which is the tallest dam in the United States that holds back a reservoir that contains 1.1 trillion gallons of water, that dam's main and emergency spillways were damaged. This led led to the emergency evacuation of 188,000 people over concerns that the dam's emergency spillway might fail. This was all caused by torrential rain and floods in the region, which then began to reveal the extensive damage in the emergency spillway. This photo shows the dam releasing 100,000 cubic feet of water per second into the main spillway. Luckily, a major disaster was avoided in this situation because of quick action by those responsible for the dam. In our number 4 spot today, we have the house of a monster. This photo was taken from the inside of serial killer Ed Gein's house, where he once used to live with his mother. If you're not familiar, Ed Gein was an absolute monster and is actually the basis for many horror movies today because of how horrifying his crimes were. Inside of his home, authorities not only found different household items that were made out of body parts, some from the victims of his crimes and some from the graveyards he would go and search and snatch from. The photos that were taken from inside of the home only scratched the surface of the horrors that were found inside. For a while, for some unknown reason, it was thought that they might use the house as a tourist attraction, but thankfully the house ended up burning down, and honestly I truly feel glad that it doesn't exist anymore. If it did, would you have gone there? In our number 3 spot today, we have Cyclone Saroha. Earlier this year, Indonesia was hit with devastating floods and landslides due to Cyclone Saroha. The damage was done on many remote eastern Indonesian islands, as well as in East Timor. The cyclone caused all of this damage and ripped through before making its way and making landfall in Australia, which is the first storm to do so since 1989. Flash floods took the lives of at least 30 people, but unfortunately this storm took many more lives as well. Relief efforts were made difficult by power outages, blocked roads that were covered in mud and debris, and considering how a lot of damage was done on remote islands, this made it really difficult because the islands were now surrounded by high waves, so access was extremely limited. This photo clearly shows the power of Mother Nature and the devastation storms like this can cause. The most terrifying part is that we are nearly powerless against these forces of nature. In our number 2 spot today, we have an acid drum. This photo comes to us from inside the house of another terrible person, the serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. This photo was taken from inside of his home after he was found out and caught by authorities. Before his arrest, he was sadly able to take the lives of 17 different people. Although this photo might look kind of plain, the horrors are plentiful. This shot shows a drum full of acid that was located inside of his home. I don't need to tell you what it was used for. I can't imagine the horrors investigators saw when they entered his home, and even previous to that as they investigated his crimes. Thankfully, Jeffrey was caught, and in 1992 he was sentenced to life in prison, but just 2 years later he was killed by a fellow prison inmate. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Dixie Fire. The Dixie Fire burned through a few different counties in California this summer. It is named after the creek that was near where the fire first started on July 13th, 2021. After it began, it went on to burn 963,309 acres before it was 100% contained. It became the largest non-complex wildfire in the history of the state of California. The fire destroyed people's homes and belongings and completely burned entire towns, and by July 23rd, it had already become the largest wildfire of the 2021 California fire season and was the cause for the unhealthy air quality that could be seen across the western United States, including states that are as far east as Utah and Colorado. This photo was taken on August 17th and it shows the fire lighting up a hillside in Lassen County. The fire didn't end up being 100% contained until very recently on just October 25th.
Coming in at number 10 is John Lennon. John Lennon was an English singer, songwriter, musician, and peace activist who achieved worldwide fame as founder, co-writer, and co-lead vocalist and rhythm guitarist of The Beatles. As a performer, writer, and co-writer, John had 25 #1 singles in the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Rolling Stone ranked him the 5th greatest singer and the 38th greatest artist of all time. He was inducted into the Songwriters Hall of Fame in 1997 and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame twice, as a member of the Beatles in 1988 and as a solo artist in 1994. At approximately 5 p.m. on December 8, 1980, John autographed a copy of Double Fantasy for Mark David Chapman before leaving the Dakota with Yoko Ono for a recording session at the record plant. In this photo, you can see him signing the autograph, and hours later, John returned to the Dakota in a limo at around 10:50 p.m. They left left the vehicle and walked through the archway of the building, and Mark then assassinated John, injuring him twice in the back and twice in the shoulder at close range. John was rushed in a police cruiser to the emergency room of the Roosevelt Hospital, where he was pronounced dead on arrival at 11:15 p.m., and he died at 40 years old. Number 9. Candy Darling was an American actress, best known as a Warhol superstar and transgender icon. She starred in Andy Warhol's films Flesh and Women in Revolt, and was a muse of the Velvet Underground. In this photo, Candy Darling is on her deathbed, taken shortly before she died of lymphoma on March 21st, 1974. In a letter written on her deathbed and intended for Andy Warhol and his followers, she said, "Unfortunately, before my death, I had no desire left for life. I am just so bored by everything. You might say bored to death. Did you know I couldn't last? I always knew it. I wish I could meet you all again." She passed away at just 29 years old. Number 8. Paul Walker. Paul Walker was an American actor. He was known for his role as Brian O'Connor in the Fast and Furious franchise. This is a photo of Paul Walker taken while he was leaving a charity event. On November 30th, 2013, moments later in this red Porsche, driven by Roger Rhodes, crashed into a concrete lamppost and caught fire, killing both men. Roger died of multiple trauma, while Paul died from the combined effects of trauma and burns. Both of their bodies were burned beyond recognition, and Paul was only 40 years old. No alcohol or other drugs were found in either man's system, and neither mechanical failure nor road conditions appeared to play a role. The car's speed was between 80 to 93 miles per hour, aka 130 to 150 kilometers per hour, and the age of the tires were the primary reason behind it. Now, the curve where both men died is a popular spot for drifting cars. Number 7. Whitney Houston. Whitney Houston was a singer and actress. Nicknamed The Voice, she is one of the best-selling music artists of all time, with sales of over 200 million records worldwide. She's the only artist to have had 7 consecutive #1 singles on the Billboard Hot 100, including 2 Emmy Awards, 6 Grammy Awards, 16 Billboard Music Awards, and 28 Guinness World Records, as well as induction into the Grammy, Rhythm and Blues Music, and Rock and Roll Halls of Fame. Whitney struggled with addiction problems, and she went to rehab for them. This photo shows Whitney Houston seen leaving True Hollywood Club 2 days before her death. On February 11th, 2012, Whitney was found unconscious in Suite 434 at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, submerged in the bathtub. Toxicology results revealed the presence of prescription and non-prescription drugs in her system, and the manner of death was listed as an accidental drowning. She passed away at age 48. Number 6. Robert F. Kennedy. Robert F. Kennedy, also known by the nickname Bobby, was an American lawyer and politician who served as the 64th United States Attorney General from January 1961 to September 1964, and as a U.S. Senator from New York from January 1965 until his assassination in June 1968. He was, like his brothers John and Edward, a prominent member of the Democratic Party, and has come to be viewed as some historians as an icon of modern American liberalism. This photo of Robert Kennedy was taken moments after his assassination at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles by Sirhan Sirhan on June 5th, 1968. He died early the next morning, and after his arrest, Sirhan said, "I can explain it, I did it for my country." Sirhan said he was motivated to assassinate Kennedy by his support for Israel during the 1967 Six-Day War. Robert died at age 42 years old. Number 5. Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley was a singer and actor. Dubbed the king of rock and roll, he is regarded as one of the most significant cultural figures of the 20th century. Having sold over 500 million records worldwide, Elvis is recognized as the best-selling solo music artist of all time by Guinness World Records. He was commercially successful in many genres, including pop, country, rhythm and blues, adult contemporary, and gospel. Elvis won 3 Grammy Awards, received the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award at age 36, and has been inducted into multiple music halls of fame. He holds several records, including the most RIA certified gold and platinum album, and the most albums charted on the Billboard 200. In 2018, Elvis was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Now, this photo of Elvis Presley was taken at Graceland in the early hours of August 16, 1977, having just visited the dentist. Later that day, Elvis had a heart attack and died in his bathroom, having had complications due to addiction addiction and a weak heart resulting from this. He had suffered from a range of health issues brought on by his lifestyle, including addiction and an indulgent diet, and he passed away at age 42. Number 4. James Dean. James Dean was an American actor. He's best known for his roles in Rebel Without a Cause, East of Eden, and Giant. This photo of him from September 30th, 1955 at a gas station was taken the day that he died. James was a keen driver and he loved to race cars. He died when he crashed the Porsche in this photo, swerving to avoid an oncoming car. When James introduced himself to British actor Alec Guinness during an encounter in Hollywood, he asked him to take a look at the car. Alec thought the car appeared sinister and told Dean, "If you get in that car, you will be found dead in it by this time next week." Now, this happened on September 23rd, 1955, 7 days before James's death, which is just creepy. He died at age 24, and after his death, James became the first actor to receive a posthumous Academy Award nomination for Best Actor for his role in East of Eden, and upon receiving a second nomination for his role in Giant the following year, James became the only actor to have had 2 posthumous acting nominations. In 1999, the American Film Institute ranked him 18th Best Male Movie Star of the Golden Age Hollywood and AFI's 100 Years, 100 Stars list. Number 3. Princess Diana. Princess Diana was a member of the royal British family. She was the first wife of King Charles III, then Prince of Wales, and mother of Princes William and Harry. She was loved by the general public for her unconventional approach to charity work. Her work initially centered on children and the elderly, but she later became known for her involvement in 2 particular campaigns. One involved the social attitudes towards the acceptance of AIDS patients, and the other for the removal of landmines promoted through the International Red Cross. She also raised awareness and advocated for ways to help people affected by cancer and mental illness. She was constantly hounded by the paparazzi, which unfortunately resulted in her death. On August 31st, 1997, Diana was fatally injured in a car crash in the Point de Lama tunnel in Paris. This photo shows her car speeding away from the Ritz in Paris at around 12:20 a.m. as Princess Diana is looking back at the pursuing paparazzi. Seconds after the picture was taken, the car went into a tunnel where the driver lost control and crashed into a pillar. Diana was critically injured but died later that morning in the hospital. Now, because Diana was so loved and hated by the royals for being so loved, there's a conspiracy theory that the royal family planned for her to be killed, and I honestly believe this, which is so unfortunate. She passed away at the age of 36. Number 2. Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr. was an American Baptist minister and activist, one of the most prominent leaders in the civil rights movements from 1955. An African-American church leader and son of early civil rights activist and minister Martin Luther King Sr., King advanced civil rights for people of color in the United States through nonviolence and civil disobedience. Inspired by his Christian beliefs and the nonviolent activism of Gandhi, he led targeted nonviolent resistances against Jim Crow laws and other forms of discrimination. King participated in and led marches for the right to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and other civil rights. The photo on the left shows Martin Luther King Jr. standing with other civil rights leaders on a balcony of the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, Tennessee on April 3rd, 1968. A day later, he was assassinated in approximately the same place by James Earl Ray. The photo on the right was taken directly after the assassination. King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital. Now, there are also many conspiracy theories surrounding the assassination, as people believe it was a setup from the government. The assassination led to a nationwide wave of race riots in Washington, D.C., Chicago, Baltimore, Louisville, Kansas City, and dozen other cities. He died at age 39. And coming in at number 1 is John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, often referred to as JFK, was an American politician who served as the 35th President of the United States from 1961 until 1963. He was the youngest person to assume the presidency by election and the youngest president at the end of his tenure. JFK served at the height of the Cold War and represented Massachusetts in both houses of the US Congress prior to his presidency. This photo of JF Kennedy was taken just before his assassination in Dallas on November 22, 1963. He was in Texas emphasis on a political trip to smooth over frictions in the Democratic Party between liberals and conservatives. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, he was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for an emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later at 1 p.m. He died at age 46. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination, which he denied, but Oswald was assassinated as well soon after. The assassination spawned numerous conspiracy theories. These theories alleged that the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination of these individuals and entities. The original FBI investigation and Warren Commission report, as well as an alleged benign CIA cover-up, have led to the claim that the federal government deliberately covered up crucial information in the aftermath of the assassination.
Alright, starting off this list in our number 10 spot we have the reflecting pool. This is one of the creepiest or most chilling images ever taken. It depicts a young girl in a graveyard who is looking down at her reflection in a pond. Okay, maybe a little eerie, but not exactly chilling. What really makes this photo what it is, however, that there are seemingly two different reflections looking back up at the little girl. No one knows who this girl is, where she is, or when this photo was taken, but it is estimated to have come from somewhere around the early 1900s. This photo was analyzed, and it has been said that it is unaltered or edited. Who knows how this photo was possible? Maybe there was some sort of invisible entity standing beside her that we could only see the reflection of, like a reverse vampire or something. In our number 8 spot today we have Bikini Island. Bikini in the Marshall Islands was once inhabited by around 170 islanders until 1945 rolled around. The US president at the time, Harry Truman, ordered that the military continue to test nuclear weapons just in case they were needed in the future, since this was just shortly after the end of World War II. Unfortunately, Bikini was the place that was chosen to be the testing site, since all planes and ships traveled on routes that weren't close to the area. The residents of the island were asked to vacate, quote, for the good of mankind and to end all world wars, to which they of course obliged, under the impression that they would one day be able to move back. Test weapons were detonated on the reef itself, on the sea, in the air, and underwater, and this photo shows what was happening during just one of those tests, and it wasn't even the largest one. Although the former residents of Bikini were promised that they would one day be able to return home, the island still remains uninhabited because of the mass amounts of radiation that still exists there. In our number 8 spot today we have this huge grasshopper. This photo is allegedly undoctored, or at least that's what people once believed, but as it turns out, this photo actually comes from a line of joke postcards. Thank God. Apparently it was a hilarious hit back in the day to create postcards depicting a super ungodly large kind of grasshopper, like the kind that would make me line up first for a trip to Mars if I saw one hopping around here on Earth. Or should I say, leaping. Like for a second, just imagine. With how high regular tiny grasshoppers can jump, this thing would be jumping into the clouds for sure. Also, like, what would it eat? No thank you to large bugs, especially ones that can jump. I'm just so glad that this one turned out to be fake. Even though it's fake, I wish this was still one that they withheld from the public. And our number 7 spot today we have these prohibition barrels. The prohibition was the outlaw of the consumption of alcohol, which was done with a ban being placed on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcohol by the US government from 1920 to 1933. This ban certainly did not stop people from producing or consuming alcohol, it was just done in sneakier ways. The black market for alcohol was booming as people began to drink redistilled industrial alcohol instead. This photo shows how big the black market industry for alcohol was, as it shows a massive stack of liquor barrels that were collected by the authorities in 1924 about to be set ablaze. The people look so tiny standing next to this insane amount of alcohol. While the prohibition is generally regarded as a failure, the biggest failure it caused was the unintended organized crime it put into life in America. In our number 6 spot today we have this neighborhood nuclear test. This photo shows a mother and her young son looking out the window and witnessing a nuclear test explosion from the comfort of their own home in 1953. Like, what? Imagine seeing that from your window now in 2021. People would be going wild. Of course, any kind of nuclear test should be done as far away from where people live as possible. I know it's not like the test was being done in their front yard or anything, but still, I certainly wouldn't be comfortable with them testing a nuclear bomb anywhere near the place I live. This photo was of course taken before the effects of nuclear radiation from these kind of explosions were publicly understood. Actually, people have suggested that the public knowledge of these kinds of side effects were suppressed during this time in order to avoid controversy about them testing these kinds of weapons in your neighborhood. While that would of course be something insane to witness firsthand, thankfully the now widely known health risks associated with this sort of thing has caused this to not be a common occurrence. In our number 5 spot today we have the Boston Marathon. This photo comes to us from 1967 and it depicts the struggles that Catherine Switzer went through in order to be the first female to finish the Boston Marathon. This photo shows race organizers as well as other participants trying to stop her from running the marathon that she trained for and was more than capable of completing. She has written a book that explains in great detail all the things she went through that day and how the critiques and opinions about a woman running the race started even before she had registered to run. People in our history like Catherine are incredibly important, as well as photos like these, because they show when people were literally trying to drag her down, she just kept on running. In our number 4 spot today we have a traffic jam. On Sunday, September 3rd, 1967, Sweden changed from driving on the left-hand side of the road to driving on the right-hand side of the road. Why? Well, I'm not exactly sure considering people downvoted the idea before it was implemented and it cost a ton of money to make the switch. Not to mention it's also super confusing for basically everyone, and when we're talking about driving, the simpler the better. Traffic lights had to be reversed, road signs changed, intersections redesigned, lines on the roads repainted, buses modified, and bus stops moved. What happened when the change was implemented? Well, that's what this photo will show you. Absolute chaos. However, after the initial shock, things did start to get better, as because drivers were much more cautious in the time following the switch, the number of traffic accidents actually dropped for a little while before inevitably rising again. Was the switch worth it? Well, no one is sure about that, but what are they gonna do? Change it back? In our number 3 spot today we have the 3 Jacksons. On August 21st, 1934, 3 fearless acrobats known as the 3 Jacksons, Jarlee Smith, Jewel Waddick, and Jimmy Kerrigan all performed a routine on the edge of the Empire State Building, which is when this photo was captured. It is said that these 3 toured as an acrobatic trio, and this stunt the photo captured was done at 1,245 feet. According to officials from the Empire State Building, it is said that this was the first time the stunt was attempted, and to this day, it has never been done again, which makes a lot of sense. While this photo is absolutely incredible and is such a testament not only to the trust they shared, but also their abilities as acrobats, I don't know who in their right mind would try to recreate this. We already have one, and I think we can just all be happy with that. In our number 2 spot today, we have the man who fell from space. Vladimir Komarov was a cosmonaut, Soviet test pilot, and aerospace engineer. He was one of the most highly experienced and qualified people, which is exactly why he was chosen for some of the very first space missions. He became the first Soviet cosmonaut to fly into space twice. Unfortunately, however, on one of these missions, things went seriously awry. A parachute failure caused his capsule to crash into the ground after re-entry on the 24th of April in 1967. He literally fell from space, and regardless of if you know anything about space and re-entry, that would have been absolutely terrifying and awful. He of course didn't make it, but the entire process left his remains almost unrecognizable. This photo shows his colleagues looking onto his remains before he was laid to rest. The contributions of people like Vladimir have allowed us to go further into space and understand more than we ever could have imagined. In our number 1 spot today we have the Gadget. This photo shows the first ever atomic bomb, and it comes to us from 1945. Called the Gadget, this bomb was an implosion plutonium device that was detonated in the Trinity test in 1945. This photo shows someone sitting next to it so casually, like it's a PB&J sandwich and not this world-changing device. The Trinity test was the very first time a nuclear weapon was detonated, and the Gadget was actually the same design as the bomb that was later detonated over Nagasaki, Japan on August 9th, 1945. There's such an eerie nature about this photo and the seemingly casual behavior of the man next to it. Did he know what this was about to unleash? Perhaps, but maybe not.
Number 10. The Hartley Violin. While this may seem like just a photo of an old violin, the story behind it is incredibly significant. This is because the instrument managed to survive the sinking of the Titanic. We all know the story of the ship that hit the iceberg and sank, so let me tell you the story of Wallace Henry Hartley. Hartley was the band leader on the Titanic, and the violin was an engagement gift from his fiancée before he took off on the journey. He was one of the players who stood on the deck of the ship and played music while it sank, attempting to calm the frightened passengers as they boarded lifeboats. Hartley was found 2 weeks later, clutching the case that was strapped to his body. Inside it was his violin, still in good condition thanks to the case protecting it from the water and cold. It went on to be the most valuable Titanic artifact ever sold, selling at auction for $1.7 million. It is now displayed at a history museum in Branson, Missouri, going on to survive long after it played its final notes on the ship. Number 9. Big Island Hiker. In 2015, Dalen Pua decided to go on a hike in Hawaii. He told his grandmother he was going to be hiking the Stairway to Heaven Trail, which his grandmother warned against as this was a prohibited area. While on his hike, he posted several pictures to social media. Most seemed to be normal, just showing off the view. However, in one photo, you can see a man amongst the trees, following behind Dalen. While a mysterious man in the woods is creepy enough, it gets worse, as Dalen unfortunately never returned from his hike, and to this day, he has never been found. His family studied the pictures closely, trying to find any clues to his whereabouts, and when they spotted the figure, they started to wonder if maybe he had been responsible for Dalen's disappearance. People wonder why this person has not come forward, wondering if it's because he was involved, or he was just scared of being caught hiking on an illegal trail. The search for Dalen consisted of the fire department, local volunteers, drone operators, and even the US Navy, and unfortunately, nothing has ever been found. Number 8. Trails in the Snow. Another hiking photo, this one comes from a mountain in the Karakoram Himalaya. Greatly accomplished mountaineer Kurt Diemberger was accompanied by his friend Herman Buhl. Buhl had been excited about the expedition, wanting to complete the hike in only 3 days. The photo that Diemberger took seems to be normal, a photo of their tracks on the snowy mountain. However, when you look closely, you can see that one of the tracks does not continue, instead falling off the side. This is because Diemberger took this photo after Herman Buhl fell off the side of the mountain. Retreating from a snowstorm, Buhl stepped off to the side, triggering a massive avalanche, and fell almost 900 meters down the slope, never to be seen again. Diemberger notes how in this situation they had not been roped together, which would have been considered a mistake in any other scenario. In this case, however, he says that if they were tied together, that he would have been pulled down, becoming lost in the avalanche with his friend as well. He went on to say that he would never attempt that mountain again, as without Buhl, there is no point. Number 7. Basketball card. By all accounts, this appears to be a regular NBA hoops card, showcasing Mike Jackson from the Knicks. However, if you look at the 2 young men on the left, you will realize that they are actually the Menendez brothers, Eric and Lyle. If you're not familiar, the Menendez brothers were from a wealthy family and were found guilty of killing their parents after they had allegedly mistreated them. The 2 weren't immediately caught and went on a spending spree and apparently watched a New York Knicks game. That's right, this photo was actually taken after the crime and before they had been arrested. After the discovery of the card, the Daily Mail was actually able to contact Lyle Menendez in San Diego prison, where both brothers are housed. He said, "It's amazing that somebody spotted it," also commenting on the haunting period that took place after the crime and before the arrest, saying that they went to a lot of Knicks games before, so going to one after wouldn't have been that extravagant. The cards are now available on eBay, usually going for about $5 to $10. Number 6. Rodney Alcala. During the 1970s, a famous game show aired called The Dating Game. The purpose of this show is for one woman to speak to 3 hidden men, asking them questions. By the end of the show, she chooses the one she wants to go on a date with, and after the show, they go. 17-year-old Leanne Leadham appeared on the show with her 3 eligible bachelors, one of which was Rodney Alcala. The show goes fine and nothing seems too out of the ordinary, Rodney even being selected as the man she would go on a date with. What viewers and producers of the show didn't know was that when Rodney was sitting on that chair, he had already committed 4 murders. It's eerie to watch the episode with the hindsight of what had happened. Luckily for Leanne, she changed her mind and never actually went on the date with Rodney, only having a photo shoot together. It makes you wonder just how many other people you've seen on TV or in photos who are actually hiding a terrible secret. Number 5. Autograph. This photo from 1980 isn't all too concerning. It shows John Lennon signing an autograph. The reality of it, however, is that he was signing an autograph for Mark Chapman, the man who merely a few hours later would kill him as he returned home from a recording studio. Chapman had approached Lennon with a fairly rare record, asking Lennon to sign it for him. Lennon then asked, "Is that all?" To which Chapman replied with, "No." Chapman says that at the time this picture was taken, he actually had the weapon in his pocket, but had chickened out of committing the crime at this time. He then went back to Lennon's apartment where he waited for several hours, reading Catcher in the Rye. Finally, as John returned home from the recording studio with tapes under his arms, Chapman shot him. He returned to reading his book until a security guard arrived, the man in tears asking if Mark realized what he had done. Mark was justly sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. Space Crew. In this photo, we see the smiling faces of 7 astronauts posing in zero gravity. Unfortunately, as with most things on this list, this story does not have so happy an ending. That's because this is the crew of the Columbia Space Shuttle. The crew spent 24 hours a day in 2 different shifts doing various different experiments in life sciences, material sciences, fluid physics, and others. Eventually, they were ready to return home to Earth in 2003. However, their re-entry would prove disastrous. On launch, it was discovered that a piece of foam had broken off and left a hole in the left wing. This hole allowed atmospheric gases to get into the ship eventually completely breaking apart. NASA suspended any shuttle flights for at least 2 years as they investigated, and were apparently criticized as the issue with foam that caused the disaster had been previously known by the organization. This led to the retirement of the space shuttle fleet, astronauts now making their way to the International Space Station by means of Russian rockets or the SpaceX Space Taxi service. Number 3. The Oscars. This photo is of Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. It shows the 2 men celebrating as they had just won an Oscar. They had written the lyrics and music for The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin, and in this photo, they were receiving the award for The Little Mermaid. While they seem excited, if you look closely at Howard Ashman on the left, it seems like something is wrong. That night, Ashman told Menken that when they got back to New York, they needed to have a serious talk. 2 days later, they returned and they spoke. Howard told Alan that he had been diagnosed with late-stage AIDS and didn't have much longer to live. Menken says he recalls Ashman saying, "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't know how Disney would react. Here I am, a gay man, and I'm working on a movie for kids, and I didn't want to be fired." As Disney found out, they instead did everything they could to allow him to continue to work on Beauty and the Beast, even packing up their storyboards and going to his home in New York. Howard later died in 1991 with a long list of accomplishments behind him. Number 2. Memorial photos. These photos look like any other historical portrait. An important fact to note about taking pictures in the olden days was that it took a long time. Like a really long time. I'm talking hours. There was definitely no quick selfie taking back then. Because of this, it was common for the subjects in photos to appear a bit blurry, because you can't expect people to be able to keep perfectly still. But if you look closely at those photos, you'll probably notice that some of the subjects are incredibly clear. Were they just masters of staying still? Well, you could say that since some of the people in these photos aren't alive. And I don't just mean because it's been so long that they've passed away by now, I mean they aren't alive in the photos. Doing this was actually incredibly common back then and seen as a way to memorialize your loved ones and help lessen grief. It is commonly referred to as post-mortem photography, and the people in the photos were often propped up on stands in order to be held in place. Number 1. Jeannie. This may look like the portrait of a normal little girl, but the truth of her story is the exact opposite of normal. Jeannie Wiley is well known as one of the most popular examples of a feral child, and this is a photo of her. She had been kept tied to a chair for the majority of her childhood, not allowed to speak or cry, her father having often barked and growled at her like a dog. She became an important look into how the minds of children are shaped and how important it is to learn from a young age. While she learned some words, it seems that she never fully learned how to speak properly. Although she couldn't speak, she seemed to be learning quickly, and she actually performed well on intelligence tests. She learned to draw, dress herself, and enjoy music. While she was incredibly popular and widely discussed, no one knows exactly where she is now. She's apparently in an adult foster care home somewhere in California, now over 60 years old.
Starting off this countdown, we have 1930s Halloween. Who here likes Halloween? Halloween. Smash that like button if you do. And also let me know what your favorite costume is that you've ever worn. Back in the 1930s, Halloween looked a lot different. Obviously, they didn't have a Party City or Spirit Halloween where they could just go to and buy a costume from. No, costumes were often homemade, which makes them look terrifying. Look at this photo. These individuals are in Halloween costumes. I'm sorry, but who are they dressed up as? The women look terrifying with those weird masks on. I would freak out if I saw someone walking down the street dressed like that on Halloween. Like, those are some next level purge masks. They seriously give me the creeps. In our ninth spot, we have the exorcism of Annalise. Annalise was a devout Catholic woman who is said to have been possessed by 5 different demons. It all started one day when she blacked out at school and began walking around all dazed. She didn't remember anything. People around her said that she was in a trance-like state. Soon, these blackouts became more frequently. Things started to get worse and she started to convulse and hallucinate randomly. Eventually, she claimed that she saw the face of the devil and could hear demons whispering in her ears. In the end, she underwent 67 exorcisms, some lasting up to 4 hours. This photo of Annalise shows you in her possessed state. It's very creepy, and her story is honestly so disturbing and scary and sad. Moving on at number 8, we have the mutated piglet. In 1986 in Ukraine, an accident at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant caused the reactor to explode. This explosion had lasting effects, and to this day, it's still considered the worst nuclear disaster. A lot of people and animals were affected by this. In fact, the animals that lived there in the late 1980s suffered tremendously from the nuclear waste. This is a picture of a mutated piglet. It was born with a deformity, believed to have been caused by its mother being exposed to the radiation. This pig is now on display at the Ukrainian National Chernobyl Museum, in case you wanted to go and see it up close. In our 7th spot, we have the wake. This photo was taken in around the 1920s during a wake for the man featured in the photo. Well, directly to the left of the photo by the 2 mourning individuals appears to be a ghostly apparition. Is this the deceased man still lingering over his body? Or is it another ghostly entity? Well, we don't know for sure. But what we do know is that this photo is very, very creepy. I mean, you can see the ghost as clear as day. Hopefully, it's just the man saying one last goodbye before going to the afterlife and not a demon. Coming in at number 6, we have the Mickey Mouse gas masks. Did you know that Walt Disney once designed a very creepy gas mask for children? Yeah. So, the use of chemical war during World War II made it so everyone would carry around a gas mask with them, just in case. So, in 1942, Mr. Disney himself invented a Mickey Mouse inspired gas mask. It was meant to calm terrified kids. Yes, I will repeat, this was meant to calm terrified kids. And clearly scare parents, because that seriously is nightmare fuel. Imagine seeing people walking around wearing those. No thank you. That's anything but comforting. Mickey looks like a demon. Anyways, with the help of the Sun Rubber Company, about 1,000 of these masks were made. They thought kids would be more inclined to wear them if they were in the shape of a fun-loving mouse. But in the end, they just turned out to be fairly creepy, like if you agree. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the expressionless. So this creepy looking mannequin thing is a dummy that nurses would use in training back in 1968. Okay, if I was a nurse and had to pretend that was my patient, bro, I'd quit. She looks terrifying. Anyways, that's all I could find about this dummy. Like, I'm not sure if they would practice CPR on her or what. But you may recognize this photo because it inspired the creepypasta called The Expressionless. So the creepypasta is fake, but the photo and the dummy is very much real. I swear, did they purposely make the dummy terrifying to scare the nurses or what? In our 4th spot, we have Gas Mask Island. About 110 miles south of Tokyo, Japan, there's a small island called Miyakijima, otherwise known as Gas Mask Island. How did it get its name? Well, this island is home to Mount Oyama, a very active volcano that emits poisonous sulfuric gas. so all of the residents have to carry gas masks with them at all time. You know, just in case these gas levels rise unexpectedly. This photo shows the residents of the island wearing their gas masks. And I know what you're thinking. This photo looks like it came straight out of an end of the world horror movie. I agree, it's insane. You thought wearing medical masks was bad? Imagine wearing a gas mask around town. Would not be fun. Moving on to number 3, we have post-mortem photography. So back in the day, there was an interesting trend that people would follow, which was post-mortem photography, aka taking photos with a person who was recently deceased. So the woman in the middle of this photo has sadly passed away. So they did this for a number of reasons. It was a way to deal with their grief. It helped preserve the image of the loved one that passed away, and it was also a little memento. This trend became common in Victorian England when there was a rise in short lifespans for the young, which is sad. And in a way, this is a sweet way to preserve the memory of a loved one. But it's creepy. Hella creepy, you have to admit it. Coming in at number 2, we have the crucifixion. This creepy photo from 1890 Germany is of a woman who suffered from mental health issues. This was their method of treatment. They thought that this would cure her. Basically, they locked her in a cellar for 12 hours a day. For those 12 hours, she was changed up in the crucifixion pose. Apparently, this was supposed to cure her mental illness. Okay, I'm no psychologist or, doctor, but that alone would drive me insane and make everything worse. Now, this was done for a number of reasons. They thought that when you make someone pretend to be crucified, they will think, well, good thing I'm not actually being crucified. Hey, my life isn't that bad. Bingo, problem solved. No, honey, no, it does not work like that, I'm sorry. And in our number 1 spot, we have the haunting photo. Ready to not be able to sleep tonight? Take a look at this photo. This is the creepiest thing I have ever seen. This is just a normal family photo taken back in the day, but the camera quality makes them all look like ghosts. I'm sorry, but that man is not human. He's like a zombie ghost. Those eyes, don't stare into them for too long or else he's going to possess you, I swear. Even the baby looks hella creepy. They literally look like a family of ghosts or demons. They're gonna haunt me in my dreams, I swear.
Starting off this list in our number 10 spot, we have the Radium Girls. At a first glance, this photo really doesn't look like anything is going on. Basically just an old photo of some women of the past working, but there is something extremely disturbing actually going on. The Radium Girls were factory workers who were made to use radium-filled paint that they were told was harmless. This self-luminous paint was being used to paint watch dials, and the women were given no protection at all, and again told that the paint was completely safe. So much so that they were actually instructed to use their lips to help point the tip of the paintbrush in order to give a fine line. Yeah, this turned out horrible when the women realized that they all had ingested deadly amounts of radiation. The injuries they suffered as well as the poisonings were horrible, with dentists being the first to notice that something was seriously wrong when the women were turning up with dental pain, loose teeth, lesions, and ulcers. The first of the Radium Girls to die happened in 1923, and before her death, her jaw fell off of her face. That's how bad this was. By the next year, 50 of the women were seriously ill and over a dozen had already passed away, and to make matters even worse, of course the companies tried to cover up their wrongdoing. So much so that they tried to smear the name of the women who had passed away, claiming that syphilis was actually the reason for their passing. In the end, once the inventor of the radium dial paint, Sabin A. von Schokocki, died in November of 1928, becoming the 16th known victim of poisoning by radium dial paint, the claims of these women were taken much more seriously. He had gotten sick from radium in his hands, not the jaw, but the circumstances of his death helped the Radium Girls in court. In our number 9 spot today, we have the attic. This photo is of Otto Frank, and the extremely somber energy of it truly is almost palpable. Otto was the father of Anne Frank, and this photo was taken in a moment where he was revisiting the attic where he and his family once had to hide. This would be an incredibly difficult and powerful moment, and it is, but because of the fact that Otto was the only member of his family to survive the war, the true tragedy is even more prominent. The photographer who took the picture, Arnold Newman, said of the encounter where he took it, quote, "The mood was depressing and I immediately began photographing him. After a few moments, the Westertoren bells next door began to ring and Frank turned to me and said, said, "Those were the bells that Anne wrote about." He suddenly broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, and then so did I. We never met again. To this day, when I lecture or tell this story to people, I find I choke up. I still can't help myself. In our number 8 spot today, we have the swimming pool protest. This photo definitely shows quite a bleak spot in history, but I really do believe that it's important to look at these moments and remember them in all of their horrific nature to ensure that we only progress forwards. This photo shows a manager of a motel, the Monson Motor Motel, and this manager is named James Brock. In the photo, you see him dumping some sort of liquid into the motel pool as people swim, and this photo was taken on June 18th, 1964. What James is pouring into the pool is actually muriatic acid, which is similar to hydrochloric acid, and he's pouring that into the pool in order to try and get the people who were swimming in it out. This photograph was taken by Horace Court and was connected to the St. Augustine movement, which at the time was a lot of peaceful protests and demonstrations that took place, which unfortunately ended up erupting into violence. On June 11th, 1964, just a week before this photo was taken, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested at this same motel after he had been asked to leave the segregated restaurant. This arrest is what led to a group of protesters planning an event where they would jump into the pool in order to try and end segregation at motel pools. This pool was considered a quote whites only pool, so when he saw these protesters standing up for themselves and swimming in the pool, this was the route he took to try and get them out. Times like these definitely show us that things were incredibly different not that long ago, but there is always more work to be done. In our number 7 spot today, we have the treatment program. This photo is said to have been taken all the way back in 1890, and it comes from a treatment center in Germany. The photo shows a woman who appears to be tied with her arms outstretched to the sides, as well as having her feet shackled in place as she is made to face a wall. This photo apparently is of someone who is undergoing treatment for their mental health. This sounds wild, but forced standing actually used to be a legitimate treatment for people exhibiting signs of mental illness in this time. Forced standing. I'm really not sure how anyone ever thought that this would help, but hey. There are definitely stranger medical practices in history. Considering the time period of when this photo came from, it is also extremely unclear as to whether or not this woman was actually struggling with her mental health. In history, people, especially women, could be considered mentally unwell for doing things like reading or being independent. And when taking that into consideration, the photo definitely becomes even more eerie, although it was definitely chilling without the story behind it. In our number 6 spot today, we have the House of a Monster. This photo was taken from the inside of serial killer Ed Gein's house where he once used to live with his mother. If you're not familiar, Ed was an absolute monster and is actually the basis for many horror movies today because of how terrible his crimes were. Inside of his home, authorities not only found different household items that were made out of body parts, some from the victims of his crimes, and some from the graves he would go and search and snatch from. The photos that were taken from the inside of his home only scratched the surface of the horrors that were found inside. For a while, for some unknown reasons, it was thought that they might use the house as a tourist attraction, but thankfully the house ended up burning down, and I truly feel glad that it doesn't exist anymore. If it did though, would you have gone? In our number 5 spot today, we have the Challenger. This is a series of 2 photos, and one after another they paint a horrible story that we will definitely never forget. The first photo shows a clearly very excited Challenger crew as they walk down the ramp ready to head off on their mission. The crew even included 37-year-old Krista McAuliffe, who was a high school social studies teacher. She had won a spot on this mission through a program with NASA called the Teacher in Space program, and she had trained diligently for months in order to be the first non-military person in space. On January 28, 1986, the Challenger mission proved to be fateful just 73 seconds after liftoff. 2 rubber O-rings failed because of the cold temperatures of the morning, and on live television, the world watched as the spacecraft broke apart and plunged into the ocean, sadly taking the lives of everyone on board the craft. It is an absolutely tragic event made even more chilling by this final photo of the crew, as well as the photos that show the explosion as it happened. In our number 4 spot today, we have the fire. This is a photo that comes to us from 2003 at the Station nightclub in Rhode Island, and it shows the band Great White as they perform. While this seems like just a regular photo that someone took on their Motorola Razr, what ensued shortly after this photo was taken is absolutely tragic. Basically, as the band performed, there were some pyrotechnics that you can see in the photo, and they were set off, and while this was meant to be a spectacular display, it only ended in disaster. The fireworks ended up setting all of the flammable flammable acoustic foam in the walls and ceiling on fire, and within 1 minute, everything that was combustible was up in flames. Within 2 minutes, the entire club was fully engulfed in black smoke, and people were having trouble finding exits. In the end, this fire took the lives of 100 people, and another 230 were injured as a result. It has gone down in US history as one of the worst and most deadly nightclub fires. In our number 3 spot today, we have the pile of bones. During the 19th century, bison were hunted so much that they were actually quite close to being extinct, and by the mid-1880s, there were only a few hundred left. Hides were prepared and then shipped off so that they could be made into leather, but usually the bones, or really everything other than the hide, was just left to decay as it wasn't, quote, useful to the hunters. The hunting of bison was so widespread and overwhelming that even the US Army sanctioned and endorsed the slaughter of herds of bison. The federal government was promoting it for a variety of reasons, including to lessen a food and material source for the indigenous peoples. The US government was even paying a bounty for each bison skull, and military commanders were ordering troops to kill bison, not for them to eat, but just so that the indigenous couldn't. That story, coupled with the sheer mass amounts of skulls seen in this photo, is exactly what makes it so exceptionally unsettling. These bones would likely be on their way to become fertilizer. In our number 2 spot today, we have the Hindenburg. This is a photo that was taken during what is now known as the Hindenburg disaster. It is commonly known that blimps, or these kinds of floating airships, use helium in them to float through the air, and it's important to note that helium isn't the choice because it's the only option, but rather it's one of the safest options because it isn't extremely volatile. Because of a US ban on the exportation of helium at the time, i.e. the Helium Control Act of 1925, although the Hindenburg was designed to use helium, because of a lack of it available on the day of the Hindenburg disaster, the much more flammable hydrogen was used. This led to complete disaster. When the Hindenburg floated off on May 6, 1937, it disastrously caught fire during its flight. Sadly, due to the fire, there were 35 casualties on board the flight that day. It is an absolutely horrendous situation, which teaches us all a very valuable lesson. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Falls. This is a photo of Annie Edson Taylor when she was 63 years old in 1901. The barrel she is posing beside is the one that she sealed herself up inside of to then become the first person to survive a trip over Niagara Falls. Why did she do this? Well, for money, of course. Annie was widowed and spent a lot of time bouncing between different jobs, but after having been burned out of her home and losing money that she had invested with a clergyman, she ended up sadly falling on some very hard times, and this is what led her to the Falls. The barrel she used was custom made, and it was constructed of oak and iron and padded with a mattress. It wasn't exactly easy to get this whole plan set up, and it ended up being delayed several times, mostly because people were afraid to be a part of this mission that was likely sending Annie to her death, and I truly don't blame them at all. On October 24th, 1901, her 63rd birthday, Annie climbed in the barrel with her heart-shaped pillow and was set adrift. The river currents carried the barrel over the Canadian Horseshoe Falls, and rescuers reached her barrel shortly after. She was alive and escaped with little to no injuries aside from a gash on her head. While her survival is great news, it's important to include what Annie had to say about the entire situation after, which was, quote, "If it was with my dying breath, I would caution anyone against attempting this feat. I would sooner walk up to the mouth of a cannon knowing it was going to blow me to pieces than make another trip over the falls." So, don't try this at home, I think, is what she's saying.
Starting off this countdown, we have the plot to kill. This photo was taken of Thomas Bart Whittaker on the left and his younger brother Kevin on the right, just hours before Thomas planned to have his family killed. So apparently the two brothers were just goofing off and their mother wanted to take a photo of them. Then later they went out for dinner as like a little celebration for Thomas completing his exams, which was a lie. Anyways, while they were at the restaurant, Thomas had his friend enter his home and retrieve a gun and stage a burglary. He then waited at the front door for Thomas's family to return home. Once they did, he shot Thomas's mom and brother. His dad managed to survive. The photo shows Thomas's happy younger brother, but little did he know that his older brother literally had a plot to kill him. It's so disturbing. In our 9th spot, we have Victor Barrio. But before we go any further, if you guys are liking this video, make sure to give it a big thumbs up and of course, subscribe to our channel. Come on guys, it really helps us out, so hit that button, subscribe, ring that little bell. Victor Barrio was a 29-year-old Spanish bullfighter. Sadly, on July 9th, 2016, his bullfighting days came to an end when a 529-kilogram bull's horn pierced through his chest. This moment was captured in front of a live audience and also was broadcasted on live TV. Some people managed to get photos as this happened and it's horrifying. You can see the look of pain on his face as the bull's horn just plunges through him. Like, I feel so bad for him and for all the people that had to witness it. It's so scary. In our 8th spot, we have the Panama hikers. Chris Kremers and Lizanne Froon were two young Dutch females that saved up to take a trip to Panama. Except while on a hike in the Panamanian jungle, the two disappeared. It wasn't until months later that their bodies were found, but it's still unclear how the two died. The last photos taken of them were in April of 2014, the day that they went on the hike. They are selfies of the girls looking very excited to be on the trip. These photos were found on their camera, which was found in a backpack along the banks of a river. The camera also contained other pictures, like of the jungle in the dead of night. Maybe they were using the camera's flash as a source of light. Another photo showed the back of Chris's head and it was bleeding. Again, it's so scary looking at these photos. Like, these poor young girls had no clue what was about to happen to them and they were so excited for their trip. Coming in at number 7, we have the drowning. On October 22nd, 2003, Tina Watson and her husband, David Gabriel, went out scuba diving on their honeymoon. They just got married 11 days earlier, and scuba diving was part of their honeymoon itinerary. Now, in this photo, if you look right at the back, you can see a diver laying on the seafloor. That's Tina Watson. A few minutes before this photo was taken, it's believed that her husband turned off her air supply and held her underwater until she drowned. Then he swam up to the surface to alert other divers that she was in trouble. The photo was captured accidentally and you can see the divers going to help Tina. Some say he held her underwater until she drowned. Others say he saw her struggling as a new scuba diver and just kind of left her there to die on her own. Either way, he pleaded guilty to manslaughter and that was the last photo ever taken of her. In our 6th spot, we have the Dyatlov Pass incident. In February of 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers set out to traverse the snowy mountains of Siberia. However, they all ended up mysteriously dying one by one. This photo was one of the last photos taken of them. Now, this case has been debated about for years, and there's tons of theories as to what happened to them. Some say they were hit by an avalanche at night and died from exposure. Others say a Yeti got them. In fact, there was a picture of a creature that looks like a Yeti found on one of the explorers' cameras. But it's a very odd case. Like, their tent was found ripped open from the inside, 2 bodies were found and they were only wearing underwear in the freezing cold. Another explorer's body was missing her tongue, eyes, and lips, and 2 of the other bodies had major chest fractures. To cause someone that much damage, it would be like equivalent to a car crash. And another hiker had a really high level of radiation on their clothes. It's just crazy, and to this day we don't know what truly happened. We all have these theories, but the only ones that really know are the hikers in the photo. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with the submarine murder. Back in August of 2013, freelance journalist Kim Wall got an interview with Danish inventor Peter Madsen. As part of the interview, Kim was set to take a trip on his homemade submarine. This photo shows Kim aboard the submarine just before her trip. Sadly, once inside, Peter killed her and dismembered her body. Why did he do this? Well, some say he became fascinated with murder and torture. Evidence showed that he had been watching videos of women being killed on his computer, and shortly before he beheaded Kim, he watched a video on it. So it was clear that he had a fascination with it. It's sad that Kim had to be his victim. In our 4th spot, we have the Facebook murder. A couple of hours after this picture was taken, Cheyenne Anton left, used the black belt she is seen wearing in that photo to strangle Brittany Gargle. The two were best friends but apparently got into a heated argument and Cheyenne and hit and strangled Brittany. Imagine taking a selfie with someone you thought you could trust just for them to go and kill you a couple hours later. It is so sick. Now, Cheyenne actually got away with this murder for 2 years until police finally found this photo on her Facebook and noticed that the belt that she was wearing was the same one found at the crime scene. She then pleaded guilty to manslaughter and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. Moving on to number 3, we have parkour gone wrong. Pavel Kashin was known for his dangerous stunts and abilities. In 2013, he challenged himself to do a backflip on the edge of a 16-floor building. He successfully completed the backflip, but as he landed, he lost his footing and fell over the edge. He died instantly. This photo was captured by his friend while he was performing the stunt. You can see he's in midair doing his trick. Sadly, that was the last stunt he ever performed. And at number 2, we have the stalker. On February of 2017, best friends Abby Williams and Libby German headed out for a hike in Indiana. This photo is of Abby Williams, taken right before they were both murdered. What's very disturbing is that in the background of these photos, you can literally see their killer lurking there. Apparently, the man was stalking them for quite some time, and in the girls' photo roll, they actually got some pictures of him, probably because they felt like he was following them. So in the last photo ever taken of Abby, you can literally see her killer behind her. It makes me so sick. Worst of all, he's never been caught. There's currently a reward for anyone that can identify the man though, so hopefully they can get some justice soon. And in our number 1 spot, we have the gruesome scene. This photo is going to send shivers down your spine. But before I show you, let me give you a quick backstory. So this photo was taken of Travis Alexander while he was taking a shower. It was taken by his girlfriend and murderer Jody shortly before she stabbed him 27 to 29 times. She also slit his throat nearly ear to ear and shot him in the head. It was a very gruesome and sinister murder. In this photo, you can see how uncomfortable Travis looks. It's almost as if he knew she was up to something. He looks absolutely terrified. Now, the camera that captured this photo was actually tossed into his washing machine as an attempt to destroy it.